commemorating the 150th anniversary of the founding of Trigg County has been printed into a program book and copies sold to the public. This is Trigg County, 1820 to 1970. The Canton area and the early settlement of Cadiz, there was some discussion which would be the county courthouse. In 1820, during the October term of the Trigg County Court, a deed was accepted from Robert Baker for 52 acres of land, including the courthouse, the public square, so a town could be established and thereafter known and called Cadiz. This order was entered in the minute book A by Will Cannon, the Trigg County Court Clerk. Carter Wood was then appointed surveyor of the streets and alleys, and the record shows that on October 14, 1820, the appointed trustees. The first merchants offered merchandise were W.P. Scott, Robert Baker, and John Hill. Tobacco was the important product and stored in Robert Baker's crudely constructed warehouse, then shipped by flatboats down the river to New Orleans Market. The pioneer firm of E.R. Street in western Kentucky evolved from Spotswood Wilkinson, who came here from Virginia early in the 19th century and started in business in Cadiz. Main Street was the first street that started with the stores along each side. The first court, called Board of Justice, was held in the log home of Samuel Orr in the Warrington community in 1820, but the building was used for just a single day. The next few meetings were held in the dwelling of Robert Baker, who granted the land to Cadiz. His home was used until 1821, when a new building, 22 by 36, was finished and received. The second courthouse was built in 1831 of brick and cost $2,445. The third courthouse was built in 1843. This was destroyed by fire during the Civil War. In 1865, the fourth courthouse was built at a cost of $1,950, remodeled in January 1881, and stood till 1892, when it was destroyed by fire. After the fire, the passage of county bonds to build a new courthouse was defeated several times, but finally, the fifth courthouse, 1895-1920, which had a large clock in the tower, which striking could be heard throughout the county during the time of its burning. Politics in Trigg County is an old and widely known county itself. The first sheriff was Thomas Raleigh, 1820, followed by George Donnell and Abraham Boyd, 1821. The first circuit clerks were William Cannon, J.E. Thompson, and H.C. Burnett. The Cadiz Post Office was established on January 5, 1821, with James Hayden being appointed to serve. One of the earliest postmasters was Robert Baker again, the grantor of lands, who served from May 15, 1844 to August 22, 1845. The first post office was located on Court Place, west of the courthouse, and James Lester served as postmaster. Ezekiel Vinson was the first man who had the nerve to start a newspaper in the county, a modest 6-column long independent local sheet called the Canton Observer. After issuing the paper 1 year at Canton, he moved his office to Cadiz and called it the Cadiz Weekly Observer. Transportation and travel by water is really the reason for location of Cadiz, for it was the journeying of new people up the Mississippi and the Ohio into Tennessee River, and especially the Cumberland River, into which flowed the waters of the Little River, which all led to our city. In the early days, Little River not only afforded navigation to the canoe and smaller boats, but in 1850 the first steamboat, the Shipper, owned by two pioneer Trigg Countyans, Mr. Cannon and Mr. Miller. They plowed the waters of Little River into the city of Cadiz to the wild screams of joy and celebration. Transportation and travel by stagecoach also served the interests and needs of Cadiz in the early days. The Cadiz House is the first hotel of Cadiz. It followed the old courthouse built in 1865. The City Hotel, located on Court Place, which is now called Cadiz Cleaners and W.C. White Lumber Company, was built sometime after the Civil War, but burned in 1904. The Cadiz Hotel, located on Main Street, was built prior to 1900 and rented by Mr. and Mrs. Malone from J.W. McKinney 1908 and purchased in 1910. Churches of Cadiz. Under the Cadiz United Methodist Church, there is no indication of the formation of it, but in 1837 the class at Cadiz took permanent form and a house of worship was built, an old brick building on West Main Street. They continued to worship here until 1870, and then realized a new and larger church had to be built. The Cadiz Christian Church was organized in 1842 by Elder John Street. Some 23 persons signed this. In 1844, the Cadiz congregation erected a log building, and this arrangement lasted for about 10 years. The Cadiz Baptist Church on April 13, 1842. Members belonging to the Baptist denomination were examined by the Presbytery, who had charge of forming new churches. In August 1842, the church became a member of the Little River Baptist Association, and in May 1843, a building committee was formed. The Cadiz Second Baptist Church, on September 25, 1870, 40 Negro members of Cadiz Baptist Church asked for their letters to form their own congregation. These were granted, and it was organized with Reverend Moorhead, moderator. John White preached for the Negro people until a pastor was called. The Mays Chapel CME Church was organized by the Reverend Christopher Humphreys in the year 1873, and at this meeting 70 names were enrolled as members. In 1874, a neat frame building and was erected at the cost of $900. Education in Trigg County. Pioneer Schools 1820 to 1850. In the early settlement and development of Trigg County, there were many obstacles that prevented the pioneer child from securing an education. Settlements were sparse, money and other means of obtaining teachers were scarce. The early pioneers were nearly always poor, and there were no buildings for schools, nor were there public funds. Despite these obstacles, credit is due to the pioneers for their efforts to secure education for their children. As soon as settlements, population, and wealth increased, log schools were built and teachers secured. Pay was small, and teachers often ill-prepared for the job of teaching. Frequently, the school was taught by a wandering or tramp teacher who came into the settlement and just announced he was prepared to teach. The first settlement schools generally had its beginning in the small log buildings that served as church and school. But as soon as the settlers could afford it, they had their first schoolhouse. These had dirt floors furnished with crude benches. A wide board was fastened to the wall by wooden pegs extending around the room, and this board answered the purpose of a writing desk. Heating was by a large fireplace which occupied almost the entire end of the building. Light was admitted through a greased paper window. The manner of instruction was one of the most primitive character. Usually the only available book was the Bible, and it became the textbook. Hand-printed charts showing the alphabet in print and script were hung on the wall. Paper for school use were unknown, so often wooden boards were painted black and written on with dried white clay, secured from a creek bank. If later paper was available, for writing the ink was made from pokeberries, and a split goose quill was used as writing material. Teachers taught the 3 R's, some singing, along with any course of study they were able to teach. The early pioneer did not attempt to extend the educational level, known as the common school, above the 3rd or 4th grade. The child, if poor, was bound up to some tradesman who used the child's labor as his fee for teaching him the trade. No compulsory school attendance was required, and only the children of well-off families attended school regularly. These schools were financed by subscription or a tuition fee, and children of the poor could not pay the small cost. Occasionally the minister or a good woman of the community would hold a free school, opened only to the very poor and the slave child. The first settlement at the present site of Canton was made by Abraham Boyd around the year 1799. He was a native of North Carolina and lived a short time in Tennessee. For several years the place was known as Boyd's Landing, and early gained prominence as a shipping point. The favorable location attracted settlers to the area, and as early as 1809 a small store was started by James Warren. In 1823 the town was laid out by Boyd and officially named Canton. Several businessmen came to town after it was laid out, and its importance as a trading point continued to grow until the building of the Louisville and Nashville Railroad to Hopkinsville, and this reduced the river traffic. During the days immediately following the Civil War, Canton was a thriving community which was large enough to support 5 hotels, 4 of which burned or blew away, 3 schools, 3 warehouses, and a large mill and a newspaper. The hotel that stands today in Canton is one of the oldest buildings in the county. It was built by Abraham Boyd shortly before 1820. And Jenny Lind, the famous singer, sang here at one time. The hotel ceased operation during 1930 and is now a private residence. Early educational facilities were few. Pioneer children in Canton had little or no education. For 40 or 50 years after the first settlement, there was very little improvement in education. Then the one-room school appeared. For years this type of school, both Negro and white, served the community. Recently all students were moved to a consolidated school though. Through the years, as the importance of the river dwindled, Canton died as a river town, and today approximately 150 people live there. The Dry Creek Primitive Baptist Church, the oldest organized church in Trigg County, still in existence, and very active, but records from each meeting since the organization until the present are on file. It is like a rare trip into the past to read these minutes. The old original book containing these was bought by H.L. Craig, who was baptized in Bertie County, North Carolina in August of 1803. In flowing longhand, the first page is taken up with the following decoration. The Church of Christ on Dry Creek, Christian County, this was before Trigg was a county, Kentucky, Saturday, the 2nd day of October, in the year of our Lord, 1805, 2 churches. Very early in the business came the articles that had to be followed, based on the scripture and guidelines which the church would operate, and the first pastor was Dudley Williams. It is believed that Elder Reuben Ross was one of the organizers, a man of more than ordinarily intellectual acquirements and eloquence. He cooperated freely with ministers of other denominations. He believed in things essential. There should be unity. Probably the most interesting thing to note in reading this old book was the fact that besides the actual preaching at each meeting, much other business was enacted. Hardly a meeting was held that did not include the bringing before the congregation of some good brother or sister who had strayed from the fold. It seems that if their conduct was questionable, a committee of 2 was sent to talk to them. He or she was told of the charges and asked to be at the next meeting and hear the charges. It was easily noted that if this person did not come, he was automatically judged guilty and excluded from the church. The charges brought against members were varied. The most common, drinking too much spirituous liquors at different times. One charge was a report of an investigation against Brother Ben and Sister Fanny. After an investigation, the question was taken and they were excluded from our fellowship for parting as man and wife. The most unusual charge was against 2 men who talked of trading hats in the Lord's house. The Dry Creek Primitive Church is considered the parent church. The Montgomery community. In 1816, Thomas Montgomery, a staunch pioneer, settled in this community and purchased a large amount of land. He was one of the first large livestock producers in Trigg County, a very good citizen, and did much toward shaping the character of the community. He was also a Baptist minister. In 1866, General John Gaines of Virginia came to Montgomery community and bought some land, where he built Montgomery Village, naming it after Mr. Montgomery, who by that time had become quite important. General Gaines laid out lots, built residences, shops, and other buildings to attract newcomers. General Gaines was a very successful businessman. In 1872, General Gaines' son, J.J., also started a business and became Trigg County's leading citizen. The blacksmith shop was near the railroad tracks and was used up to a few years ago. The Methodist Church was organized in 1879 by Reverend Shelton and had 12 members. In 1883, they built a church for $1,100, but this is now gone. About 1890, a cyclone struck the Montgomery community called the Lucas Storm, and it destroyed a large part of the village. Mr. Lucas, a rather wealthy elderly man, owned a lot of land, a fine house, and a stable of expensive horses and many servants. When the storm struck, everything he owned was blown away. A barrel of whiskey was blown out of his cellar and into a pond, and Mr. Lucas died as a result of injuries he received in the storm. The old rock house. John McCoffin was born in Ireland in 1773 and came to America in 1792 and received a commission to act as surveyor in the Kentucky Territory. He settled in Trigg County and called his property Rocky Ridge. The first home built was a log cabin. He was a Presbyterian, and as there were no families of this faith near, he went to Blount County, Tennessee, and married Miss Hannah Johnson in 1802. In 1814, a rock house with walls 2 foot thick, a basement, 2 full stories, and an attic was built. Story or legend says the builder who built this house was paid with a double-barrel breech or muzzle-loading gun. They lived here with their 7 children until 1831. At this time, his conscience bothered him because he owned slaves. He freed the slaves, gave each a parcel of land, and moved to Ohio. His son stayed on and was given power of attorney to sell all the land. In 1849, the rock house was first sold to Mr. James Thompson. And then in 1850, it is recorded for $1 he sold a parcel of land to the Rocky Ridge Baptist Church. Just beyond the rock house, there is a cemetery with 4 stones thought to be John's grandchildren. This home was on the old stage line and served as a stagecoach stop. The Edmund Bacon home was one of Montgomery's famous historical sites. It was a stagecoach stopping place or transfer station and called Bacon Inn. The house was designed by Thomas Jefferson, who later became our second United States president. It is an odd-looking house, and Captain Bacon owned a lot of land, and he took several of the cabins around and had them moved up and incorporated into the house, which stood here 1825 until 1960 when it burned. Captain Bacon was a great racehorse enthusiast and had a racetrack in his front yard. The stables where he kept his horses were later used as cabins for farm hands. In 1935, Mrs. Robert Fairley, who owned the Bacon farm, found in the attic of the Bacon house the design for the house and several letters written by Thomas Jefferson to Captain Bacon. Realizing their great historical value, Mrs. Fairley made several pictures of the place and, along with the letters, sent them to Thomas Jefferson Museum in New York City. The Rocky Ridge Negro church was first used by whites. Later they built a church at Montgomery, which was called Rocky Ridge Church. After the whites moved, the first church was used by Negroes, but in 1883 this burned. Roaring Springs area was settled in the 1700s and early 1800s by families from Virginia and North Carolina. Settlers continued coming to the extent that this soon became a thriving community of that early day, and a village consisting of 5 businesses of merchandise of the period, 1 hotel, livery barn, and a grog shop known as a saloon. This village and surrounding area became known as Roaring Springs due to the existence of a very large and beautiful cave, out of which flowed a large stream of pure, clear water. This is our report on Trigg County. In case these historical booklets are lost and absorbed into families, we now have it on tape.